Benvenuti cari amici Samu Bit di questo nuovo video. Oggi andremo a intervistare Benjamin Cohen perché ha tantissime cose da dirci su quello che potrebbe essere il prezzo di Bitcoin per questo 2022 e per cui iniziamo subito. Naturalmente, se vi piacciono questi contenuti che sono un po' diversi, commentate all'interno della sezione commenti, per cui iniziamo subito.
Welcome back everybody to Altcoin Daily. Today we are joined by the great, the powerful Benjamin Cohen into the cryptoverse on YouTube, a PhD in engineering, a really smart guy, focuses on the charts. Ben, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me. It was great to see you guys in Miami as well. Meet you guys for the first time.
Great to see you IRL in Miami, Bitcoin Miami. You threw a wonderful party. What are your thoughts on the community of Bitcoin Miami?
It was incredible. And it was my first conference, so I wasn't really sure what to expect, but it was crazy to see just 20,000 people there, all descending on Miami and seeing everyone building and everyone kind of coming together. It was pretty cool.
Totally.
I will say, dude, your community showed up in droves. The Ben Cohen into the cryptoverse community, huge, way more passion and huge than I ever imagined.
Thank you.
Anyways, let's jump right into it. I want to talk to you about Bitcoin. We'll record a separate video on some of your favorite altcoins. I guess just to start, Ben, it is now April, getting into the summer months of 2022. Bitcoin still between $40,000 and $50,000, I believe. What are your general thoughts on Bitcoin today?
Yeah, so, we're sort of seeing...
Ok, per cui è stato introdotto Benjamin Cohen, per chi non lo conoscesse, è uno dei più importanti youtuber a livello cripto. Tra l'altro c'è anche un dottorato in ingegneria, e il fatto che lui poi si sia dedicato esclusivamente al mondo cripto, ok, fa capire come lui sostanzialmente ci creda, e per cui ora andrà a darci quella che è la sua idea, ok, per Bitcoin, e se effettivamente quelli che potrebbero essere i scenari sia bullish che bearish.
Yeah, and if you think about the last year, a whole lot of nothing with respect to Bitcoin. And as you guys know, I like to follow the logarithmic regression charts for Bitcoin, just to kind of get an idea of where it is. And I think the best argument right now for kind of where we are is we're like in no man's land. There's definitely the bullish case. There's also the bearish case. We're sitting at a pretty important level right now on a lot of different charts, where it shows that if we were to experience, something like a March 2020 capitulation, or, like a December 2018 capitulation, that would take you down to essentially what would be the best time ever to buy Bitcoin. But as we also know, there's no guarantee that we go there. I mean, you just look at the chart and you go back to 2021, the summer of 2021, and we also sat in no man's land, and then we ultimately went back up sort of to the top of the regression band. So, I look at these charts, like the regression charts, and just sort of figure out what are realistic possibilities. And according to this chart, it says the upper bound on Bitcoin right now is around $134,000. That'd be like best case scenario in the short term, absolute mania phase.
Ok, lui ci dice che in base a questa banda logaritmica Bitcoin potrebbe raggiungere, nelle migliori ipotesi, secondo lui, i $134.000.
Could get us to 133K. And then to the downside, if we were to go back to, say, this undervaluation region, that's sitting somewhere between $20,000 and $25,000. But again, one of the interesting things to consider with these charts is that monotonically increasing functions, right? So the longer we just chill, these lines are just slowly catching up to where we are. So again, the way I think about where the market is right now is I look at charts like this, and this is for the entire asset class, but obviously it really does capture where Bitcoin is. I say we're just tracking, we're basically tracking the fair value of the asset class. Okay, so you can think about, what does the fair value mean? Is it, you could argue that it's just whatever the cryptocurrencies are trading at. But if you think about the asset class going through like boom and bust cycles, I think that, this chart pretty clearly shows that right now we're just tracking what the fair value of the asset class is. And it's pretty humdrum time, right? Like the crypto markets are somewhat boring right now compared to what they were last year. and in 2020. But that's also not necessarily a bad thing for long-term investors like us who just want to, slowly acquire a position over time and then just.
Ok, lui ci dice che la peggiore ipotesi potrebbe essere che Bitcoin può dampare sui 20-25 mila dollari. Ovviamente ognuno poi reagisce in base ai cambiamenti, così bisogna fare anche nella vita. Per cui lui che cosa dice? Se andiamo a prendere effettivamente i 130 mila dollari, secondo me comunque bisogna portare a casa, che è qualcosina sicuramente. Se andiamo a prendere i 20-25 mila dollari, naturalmente magari impostare un piccolo piano d'accumulo, perché abbiamo visto che comunque Bitcoin nel lungo termine è sempre stato profittevole, diventa interessante. Quindi in entrambe le ipotesi, in ogni caso comunque si può fare denaro. Questo deve essere il succo, l'argomento.
Wait for the asset class to explode again.
Now, Benjamin, I see in past, all the history of this chart, the Bitcoin price has never rode the fair value line. It's either bounced off it as support or been rejected off it as resistance. Right now, we're right on the line. Would you say
exactly? We're right on the line. And actually, there's another chart that also shows the exact same thing for just Bitcoin. And this is why I think right now I think the next, let's say, 3 months are really going to help define where Bitcoin is going, for the rest of the year. And the reason I say that is because there's 4 times in history where we've been at this level, 4 times. And you can see, after coming back down. So once here, and we fell below it, right? We fell below the fair value. By the way, the fair value of Bitcoin, according to this chart, is around 36K. Okay, so that's where the fair value.
E la cosa molto importante che lui dice è che per ben 4 volte nella storia, ricordo Bitcoin nasce nel 2009, è andato a prendere proprio la banda logaritmica sulla zona gialla, 1, 2, 3, 4, ok? E più in particolare che cosa potremmo vedere? Siamo anche andati al di sotto della banda logaritmica, quindi i 20.000 sono plausibili, ok? Tutto è possibile nella vita. Però, che cosa potremmo vedere? Se effettivamente che avrà questo bottom in cui oramai tutti se l'aspettano, quindi abbiamo visto come prima tutti si aspettavano i 100.000, non sono arrivati, adesso tutti si aspettano i 20.000 e probabilmente magari non arriveranno, torniamo a 30, secondo me comunque il supporto di 30 è forte. Naturalmente noi sappiamo come su Bitcoin e sulle altcoin tutto può cambiare in pochissimo tempo, quindi secondo me la migliore, tra virgolette, soluzione è reagire in base ai cambiamenti, cioè lo ribadisco, Bitcoin droppa 20, vado a mettere, Bitcoin va a 100.000, vado a prendere. Questo deve essere un po' il ragionamento, secondo me.
The fair value in the end of 2024 will be 100K. We go through boom and bust cycles. Well, you'll notice there's 4 times we've been at this level, right? 2011, we fell below. 2013, mid 2013, we held, right? You can kind of.
Anche interessante quello che ci dice per il 2024, che proprio gli attuali livelli della zona gialla potrebbero essere proprio i 100.000 dollari.
See, we came down to this level. We ultimately held the fair value band, and then we went on to, to another peak later on. And then in 2014 and 2018, we fell below it. So if you look at where we are, right, it's a very pivotal moment in the asset class. I think we're either going to bounce off of it in the next few months, or we're going to get some type of capitulation below. And, I would prefer to see us bounce off of it. As you guys know, I'd like to see the cycle ultimately extend well out into, into next year sometime. But I just want to show kind of where we are today and how it compares to where we've been in the past. And we know, I was watching your channel back in 2018. We saw this basically the floor fall out on Bitcoin at the end of 2018. And so, if something like that were to happen, that basically sets up, an accumulation of a lifetime phase, if you will, right? If something like that were to happen. But right now we're sort of just riding that fair value logarithmic regression band. And as I said, the fair value is currently just north of $36,000.
So you've been saying for a long time, talking about lengthening cycles very early on. So I know you've been thinking for a while that perhaps we'd see another peak in 2023, perhaps the cycle top. Is that what you're still thinking? And at this point in time, I guess, how bullish are you on Bitcoin for the next couple of years? I know you're a Bitcoin holder. What's your thesis?
Yeah, well, so yeah, the lengthening cycle thesis basically just comes from, you know, looking at market cycle ROI, right? And noting that every major peak occurred later on than the previous.
Ok, ora è molto interessante perché gli chiedono in base ai precedenti cicli, tu rimani bullish su Bitcoin, e ora lui va a spiegare i vari cicli che abbiamo avuto nel corso del tempo, che su Bitcoin naturalmente vedete come i primi cicli hanno dato maggiori profitti in minor tempo, i successivi cicli stanno dando minori rendimenti in maggior tempo perché ovviamente la capitalizzazione in Bitcoin è aumentata.
So,
Ricordo che ora siamo nel quarto ciclo, cioè quello in zona rossa. Perché vedremo se effettivamente questo è stato il top oppure sostanzialmente andrà a continuare questo ciclo.
you know, if we're going to see it, I don't think it's going to happen in 2022. I think it would be more likely to happen in 2023. I think after just like a mania phase that we had in late 2020, you need a cool down period, right? You need some type of a cool down period. And really the question is it going to look something like this, where the risk on Bitcoin kind of comes to this sort of intermediate phase where we were in 2013, right? Where it's undervalued or it's, maybe I shouldn't say undervalued. It's at a relatively low risk level compared to where we were a year ago. And then we just sort of need to work it out for a while. So basically the idea is we just need time to work out.
Ok, la cosa secondo me stra interessante in questo momento va a fare un paragone con quello che è successo, scusate,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely remain macro bullish on Bitcoin.
Sì, nel 2013-2014, perché lui sostanzialmente che cosa ci dice? Attenzione, ancora su Bitcoin c'è stata questa correzione, ok, successivamente al grande pump, però quello che potrebbe aspettarci è il pump finale dove Bitcoin nel 2015 andò poi a raggiungere i $1.000 e in questo caso potrebbe raggiungere i 100k, quindi potrebbe essere sottovalutato perché il rischio rispetto a un anno fa è molto inferiore se ne andiamo a considerare rischio-rendimento.
I would still think that there's a really good chance we'll see some type of a peak out in 2023. I think 2022 is still going to be somewhat of a choppy year. You know, just with everything kind of going on in the world from like a macroeconomic conditions, it's not really the best environment for Bitcoin to rally right now, if we're being kind of honest with ourselves. But so I do lean that 2023 is probably going to be a much better year than 2022. With that said, if we have a capitulation, okay, so like if the bear thesis plays out, which by the way there
E ci dice che sostanzialmente, secondo i suoi cicli, se effettivamente questo avverrà, potremo vedere i massimi a fine 2022, inizio 2023, quindi sostanzialmente come quello che avvenne nel 2017. Ricordo che i cicli si stanno allungando, per cui in quel caso avevamo avuto dei cicli ogni 4 anni, potremmo avere anche dei cicli ogni 5-6 anni. E ora ci dice, in caso di capitolazione, che cosa potrebbe succedere? Quali potrebbero essere i prossimi rendimenti a partire dai minimi?
is some evidence to support it. It's not, I mean, we've been through the market plenty of times to know that, you know, it can always go a little bit lower before it goes back up. So if we were to get a capitulation though, and we saw something similar play out like 2018, I think that you're kicking the can down the road an extra year. And that would actually, at that point, it would actually be a new cycle, I think. Like, so if Bitcoin does capitulate, like the bears are calling for, you know, back to say $20,000 or, you know, something like that, then at that point I would have to say that is a completely new cycle, and then we need to consider the implications of that.
So let's hear about those two scenarios. Let's say maybe, just obviously it's just speculation, dubious speculation, Benjamin, but if we capitulate and form a new cycle, 2024, what do you think the potential peak could be? And if we don't do that and there's a potential peak in 2023, what are you thinking?
I think the price target is kind of the same, maybe a little bit higher if we get a capitulation. So the reason I say that is because if we don't get a capitulation and we just sort of kind of ride the fair value line for a few more months and then ultimately go up, I think the ROI for the cycle will probably be capped somewhere between like a, you know, a 40x to a 50x. So as measured from market cycle bottom in, at $3,100, you're talking somewhere between like 120K, 150K, maybe we could go up to 200K depending on how long it extends. So I would say that if it happens in 2023, probably 100 to 200K. And if we capitulate, then at that point we would have to consider a new cycle bottom. So like, let's imagine.
Ok, secondo me questo è uno dei punti più importanti del video. Lui ci dice: il bottom a seguito del coronavirus marzo 2020 fu a $3.000. Potremmo vedere un 40-50x da allora. Secondo lui, come ottica più ottimistica, è proprio la migliore di tutti i $200.000. Ok? Questo sostanzialmente è il suo pensiero. Nel caso invece di capitolazione, che sostanzialmente implicherebbe il raggiungimento dei $20.000 secondo Cowen, ok? Quindi un Bitcoin che va a $20.000 implicherebbe l'inizio di un nuovo ciclo, quindi il ciclo attuale, quello che vedete in rosso, non lo andrà più a considerare, e da lì potrebbe essere il prossimo bottom. E ora arriva il bello, perché ora arriva il bello.
Imagine, let's walk through that scenario. So let's say the bears are right. And Bitcoin capitulates, we get one more 50% correction. We already had one, right? So if we get another one and Bitcoin goes back down, to see like 70% down, 80% down from the all-time high, and it's, so let's say $15 to $20,000. If that plays out, then we have to look at diminishing returns and say, okay, cycle 3 was a 100x, cycle 4 was, say, like a 20x. If that plays out. And so then the next cycle after that, I think we would have to assume, we're going to continue to have diminishing returns. But let's say we get like a 10x or something from the bottom. I mean, if the bottom is 20K.
Ok, quello che ci dice lui, andiamo a vedere quelli che sono i cicli. Il primo ciclo fece più di 400x. Secondo ciclo sui 400x. Il terzo è andato a fare su 100 volte, ok, dai quelli che erano i precedenti ultimai. E per ora siamo arrivati a un 20x. Quindi lui dice: se effettivamente i 70.000 saranno il 20x, cioè dai 3.000 essendo arrivati a 60.000 sarà il nuovo ultimai, potremmo fare da quel prossimo minimo il 10x. Prima di Bitcoin torna a 20.000 e poi il prossimo ciclo si va a fare $200.000. Questa è un po' la visione di Cowen, ok? Nel caso in cui invece ovviamente Bitcoin dovesse riraggiungere, ok, magari i $200.000, poi stornare del classico 80%, magari raggiungere poi 40.000, 50.000 come minimi, ora noi non lo sappiamo, potrebbe sempre essere da allora un 10x.
A 10x would get you to 200K, right? If the bottom is, say, 25K, a 10x would get you to 250. So I think really it ultimately depends on if we capitulate, right? If we do, and the next peak doesn't come until, say, 2024/2025, then we probably could go a bit higher than we could if the price, if the peak was already, or say like in 2023. And the reason I say that is because basically the underlying thesis that, I think both of us operate with Bitcoin is that it trends up with time, right? So by 2023, the fair value of the asset class is only, or say of Bitcoin, will only be 71K. So if we see some type of a peak, maybe a 2x above that, that's getting pretty heated. But by, say, 2025, the fair value will be 130K. So, a 2x above that is going to get you well over $200,000. So I think if it's 2023, it won't be quite as high. If we get a capitulation, it gives us more pain in the short term, which would be hard for a lot of people to navigate, but it simultaneously sets up basically the best buying opportunities on Bitcoin you would ever get.
Are you like me, Benjamin, and like a lot of people who've been in Bitcoin for a while, where, you talked about, all we need is time, and then eventually it just tends to trend higher if you believe in Bitcoin, if you believe that the world is going to turn towards the undebasable, permissionless, censorship resistant, hard money. If that's the case, there's some people not going to sell a portion of their Bitcoin to like 2030, to like 10 years down the road. And if that's the case, how much Bitcoin do you think the average person could accumulate today?
Ok, quindi questo sostanzialmente secondo me era il pezzo più interessante. Quindi che cosa vorrei dirvi io? con questo video e dopo andiamo a finire l'ultima parte. Secondo me il segreto, ok, naturalmente noi siamo qua tutti per migliorare, secondo me, il nostro stile di vita, la qualità della nostra vita, ma uno dice, ok, nel presente mi deprivo, ma non è che sia una deprivazione, perché poi dipende da come siete voi, è tutta una questione di mindset, ok? Mi deprivo di parte, ok, di miei soldi che non utilizzo, ok? Per avere di più in futuro. Questo è il ragionamento, ok? E andrò a sfruttare i momenti di crisi per prendermi Bitcoin ai livelli più bassi. Questo deve essere il ragionamento. Per poi magari, se uno può venderlo, che in futuro, se no lo può accumulare. Però il ragionamento è, vado a soffrire oggi, tra virgolette a soffrire, per avere di più domani.
0.2, 0.5 to be considered wealthy in Bitcoin terms in the future?
It's interesting because that question, like, I feel like the answer to that question kind of changes every cycle, you know? It was like in 2014, people were talking about accumulating 10 Bitcoin because the price was only $200, you know, like it wasn't that inconceivable.
Ora gli chiedono quanti Bitcoin bisogna avere per un giorno che star bene con Bitcoin. E lui dice nel 2014 con 10 Bitcoin potevi poi aspirare un giorno a diventare qualcuno. Oggi noi sappiamo che 10 Bitcoin sono $400.000, quindi qualcosina ok sono. Poi
for an average person back then to get 10 Bitcoin. And then in 2018 and 2019, everyone was talking about accumulating 1 Bitcoin, you know, like, because it was, I mean, 1 Bitcoin was basically the equivalent of accumulating 10 the cycle before. So now we find ourselves, now we're in 2022.
Ok, quindi nel 2019, dove il prezzo era circa di $6.000, quei prezzi lì, 8.000, dipendeva durante l'anno, già avere un Bitcoin era tanto, era difficile, perché dovevi avere $8.000. Ora nel 2022 avere 0.1 Bitcoin è già qualcosa di importante, ok? Perché comunque devi avere $4.000 da investire. Quindi ora gli chiedono per il futuro quanti Bitcoin devi avere per star bene?
And it seems like that, you know, like 0.1 Bitcoin is sort of like the new threshold that people are trying to build up to, because 0.1 Bitcoin is a lot of money. I mean, you're talking about over $4,000. So, you know, I think the goals for people to shoot for, I think they change depending on when they got in and how early they were. So longer term, people who've been here longer, you know, obviously they had their goals that they were trying to reach in a prior cycle. Now that we're in this cycle, you know, I think if you can get, I think it's somewhat untenable for a lot of people to get 1 full Bitcoin, because it's a lot of money. But, you know, if you can work your way up to a few tenths of a Bitcoin, I think that's going to go a long way, mainly because if you fast forward in your mind down the road a few years, if sort of the fearful price that we're all worried about is, say, $200,000, you know, I mean, half a Bitcoin is 100K, and 100K is a lot of money. So I think the answer to that question obviously changes every cycle. You know, right now it's probably a few tenths of a Bitcoin if you can get there. And next cycle, whenever that is, right? If it's a lengthened cycle and then, you know, it's further out, or if we capitulate sooner and then we have another cycle after that, then you know, getting to 0.1 Bitcoin would probably be a feat that most people would not be able to accomplish. I mean, especially if Bitcoin's trading for like $200,000, you know, to save up 20 grand, for a new investor to save up 20 grand and putting it in an asset that might be new to them would be very, very hard to do. So the answer obviously changes every cycle, but yeah, I think a few tenths of a Bitcoin is probably what a lot of people are shooting for right now.
Benjamin, if you want to take us off screen share.
1/10 of Bitcoin. That's obviously every cycle that does get much, much bigger. I would love to know for the audience down below, you know, if Bitcoiners are right, what could 1/10 of a Bitcoin be in a decade from now? But Aaron, I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, Benjamin, thank you so much for coming on.
Ok, quindi lui sostanzialmente alla fine afferma che se oggi è difficile, tra virgolette, acquistare 0.1 Bitcoin, che sono $4.000, in futuro sarà difficile acquistare un centesimo, ok, di Bitcoin, soprattutto se il prezzo di Bitcoin potrebbe raggiungere i $200.000. Spero che vi sia piaciuto questo video, commentate sotto e ci vediamo presto.